Coming up on this episode of FP Next.
If you don't have irrigation, it's very challenging. Well, it's like this time of year. It's always, you never know what you're going to get. If you don't like the weather today, wait till tomorrow type thing. And it varies across, we're talking from, like I said, North Carolina all the way to California and that Southwest. So, and even within each region, it varies.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Shop Talk episode of FP Next, powered by John Deere. I'm one of your co-hosts for this farmer and rancher-driven podcast, Sarah McNaughton-Peterson, and I'm here with Curt Arns.
Hi, Sarah. Yes, we're powered by John Deere, so for all of your equipment and technology needs, see your local Deere dealer. So, Sarah, we've had crazy changes in weather around here in Nebraska. I'm assuming that maybe you've got the same thing up north, huh?
Yeah, so we had a little bit of weather whiplash because the week before we had a 98-degree day, and it was super warm, super hot. All my plants that were outside that started getting planted all got singed by the heat. And then we took a full 180, and now it's been raining for about the last 5 days, and we've gotten almost 3.5 inches of rain during that time. So now all my plants are drowning, and we've just got mud pits all over our place. So, I mean, it's pretty much the par for the course.
Yeah, that's right. I know here in Nebraska, I think a lot of folks on social media saw that wall of dust blowing across. I think that was out, it was out by Grant, Nebraska, and it's all over social media. So that, we've had some high winds, tornadoes, rain, I don't think there's been any snow this week yet, but you just never know. And we, like you, had in the 90s last week. So it's really been quite a change, and I guess it's just normal spring. But a lot of the corn and soybeans are planted, and the rain is very welcome for as dry as we've been, and that kind of fits into what we're talking about today, because we're going to talk about water, right?
Absolutely. We teased it a little bit already, but we're going to cover some timely topics, including farming with either too much or not enough water, kind of like our guest today, the area he covers, has been dealing with. And of course, it's summertime, and with those hot temps comes the sun. And so we're going to talk a little bit about skin cancer and skin cancer prevention. So, Curt, I think we better get into it.
Yeah, we've got today we welcome Brad Haire, who's the executive editor of Farm Press. He's based in Albany, Georgia, and he's been on the team around here since 2012. So, time flies, Brad. Like so many other editors that we've had on FP Next, he covers all things Southern agriculture and loves it. And so we really enjoy hearing about how things are down south. So welcome to FP Next, Brad.
Hey, Curt and Sarah, I appreciate y'all letting me be on. Yeah, time is not, it's kind, but it sure flies by, Curt, for sure.
Well, Brad, we'd like to start out, get a little background, how you kind of got into your current position, and talk a little bit about the publications that, are the executive editor over, kind of the area you cover, and, all those things about Southern Ag. Kind of give us an intro.
Sure. I'm, from South Georgia, and I always make the joke is we say that because we don't want to be confused with anything close to Atlanta around here. So we're from South Georgia. But I've been with the company, as you said, about 13 years. Before that, I was actually working for University of Georgia Extension, and I don't know if you, Curt, I don't know if Sarah, but also my first job out of college was actually with a real live, thriving newspaper, which they don't exist anymore. But I'm thankful I had the time with those. I appreciate it, Curt and Sarah. Yeah, I'm the executive editor for the Farm Press team, which covers Southeast Farm Press, Delta Farm Press, Southwest Farm Press, and Western Farm Press. So my team comes from Raleigh, North Carolina, all the way to Redding, California. So we cover a good bit of swath of the country, but mostly it's that southern part in the Southeast, Delta, and Southwest. And of course, Western. If we're talking water, there's so many things going on out there. So, but that's my background. Other than I have a loving family that loves me sometimes.
Sometimes you joke, right? I know me and Curt have the same type of jokes, just sometimes here and there.
This is going to be littered with dad jokes, Sarah. Sorry. So.
I'm excited to hear them. We always ask our guests about the food because Curt and I are very food focused here. It's always weather, food, and like animals, what we seem to be the big three. So what is your favorite local place to get a burger? Or since you're in South Georgia, maybe it's barbecue instead of a burger.
Maybe we need to help these people over there listen to me. We have a fortunate, not far from us, a meat company called Salt Licks, and it's kind of local. They have another place in another town here, but if you want to get a good burger, and if you're anywhere near Leesburg or Dawson or Sassa or Albany, Georgia, go to Salt Lick and get a hamburger, and you'll appreciate And you'll thank me. They got the fixings on the side. You make it there yourself. It's not a sit down thing. You go there and get it, take it to your truck, sit out there. Got some benches in the back, but they got everything you need right there. And that's my favorite place to get a burger, local burger for sure.
Those are the absolute best places. I mean, that, that's just perfect. Last year, Sarah and I asked all of our guests, pretty much where their favorite place was, local place to get a burger or some food. And then we did a map at the end of the year, and covering all over the country. So someday we're gonna hit the road and do a food tour, I think. So we'll have to add that one to our list. It was really neat and kind of fun to hear everyone's take on the local food scene in their own area, because we've covered pretty much the whole country. So we'll add yours to the list now.
A friend of mine is an extension specialist, and for 10, almost 12 years, he documented every meal he had in extension meetings over the course of winter meetings. So he has a data sheet of everything, if it's chicken, shrimp, or if it was barbecue. And I said, there's some sort of, we got to tease that out. There's got to be something to be said about areas if you tease out every meal he's had for the last 12 years. And you're talking 30 extension meetings a year. So that's just a lot of stuff. Anyway, I'm getting off subject, which I always do.
So some statistician will do a master's thesis on that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So we were talking about, the geography that you cover, basically the whole southern half of the country, and the differences in crops and climate and topography from west to east is just huge. You personally, in Georgia, you've covered a lot of different, very interesting stories over the past few months. And is there any of those stories that kind of stick out to you, or that were really interesting, or maybe revealed something that you didn't know, or surprising? I mean, if you could just share with us a couple of your favorite stories over the past few months.
Um, there's been a few, Kurt, but really in my position, I really get to read all my other Farm Press team members, and for me, there's been a couple of columns I've written that were personal, but to stick with the water here, one of the stories in the last month was written by Whitney Haywood, who was our staff writer with Delta Farm Press, and like much of the country, there's been just brutal weather coming through in certain parts, and she did a story with a farmer who had, a tornado come through, wiped out much of what he'd been doing up until that point. This would have been a month ago. Of course, the flooding is what's the worst part there. But she did a story with him. She went to the farm just a few days after the event, and he was so positive. And I talked to her just in the story, but also just in real life on what can you do? You pick back up and we go back at it. 2 or 3 days later, they had the place cleaned up and they were back in the fields trying to get stuff planted. To me, it wasn't my story. And there's similar stories. Y'all know y'all could do the same ones too with y'all's regions and our other Farm Progress staff writers and editors. It's those kind of stories that just blow my mind. It's just the resilience of farmers in facing that kind of setback and just bounce right back up. And it's always the community. It's never one person that gets hurt. Them houses or their areas might not be flooded, but they show up and they start helping each other. And we can get into the emotional part of this, but weather is emotion. Everything's emotional. But the part of that one was one of my favorite ones. And I'd love to go back. If I was more prepared, I'd look at the guy's name because it needs a shout out. But please, if y'all hadn't read that one, go look at it. It says everything, lets you know an event happened to the event, what it happened, the actual how much the damage, and then it gives you a person that happened to, and it gives you a resolution on going forward. So it was well done, and it doesn't stand out as an individual piece. We have them all across Farm Progress, but that one just stood out to me in recently, Kurt.
Absolutely. I know we always do link all the links and everything in the episode description. So if we're wanting to look for that story, everybody can go to the description there. So, of course, we talked a little bit about water and the emotions behind weather. And I know when we had one of your writers on, Shelly Hughley, who writes for Southwest Farm Press, she was talking a lot about the water and the lack of water availability and kind of the emotion behind it, which Curt and I have loved visiting with everybody that we've had, especially those from Farm Press, kind of sharing those emotional stories. What's kind of the long range outlook looking like for parts of the South who are either embroiled in drought or flooding? It's either too much or not enough water.
Well, it's like this time of year. It's always, you never know what you're going to get. If you don't like the weather today, wait till tomorrow type thing. And it varies across. We're talking from, like I said, North Carolina all the way to to California and that Southwest. So, and even within each region, it varies. Um, to talk more specific about the Southwest, I know y'all had Shelly on, and which I know she did a great job, but it's all relative. Somebody says 4 inches of rain is a lot, and it may be the most they get in a year in some parts of Texas, and they're happy to get it. And then you talk about Georgia and places we haven't. This is not without hurricanes or stuff like that, but in the last month, we've had 16 inches of rain around my house. So it's all relative to how the land handles it and what you can do with it. For Georgia and the southeast immediate, it's really been kind of both. We had drought, 2 weeks ago, level 2, level 3 in some spots according to the drought monitor, and that's because it's the way our land is around here, and our topography and our sandy soils. I mean, if we go 2 weeks without a rain, we are classified as a moderate drought already because of water. It's sometimes I see farmers and they actually say, they're used to planting on a beach because it looks like a beach. That's what the sandy soils look like. That's why they say they don't want to go to the beach on the summer, because they're at the beach every day when they're farming around here. And so if you don't have irrigation, it's very challenging. But when you get that rain, it comes in, it does slow things up. We're a little bit behind on planting in Georgia specific, though we are ahead of, our corn is looking good, Curt and Sarah. We planted corn back in February and March. We have corn around here, which we have more corn. I know we're not a corn state, but we have more corn this year due to the commodities prices, but we have corn that's at, we have tasseling corn, and we have corn at Beast 10, but tasseling as well. And the dryland corn, which is about a 1 in a 5 year option around here if you don't have irrigation, is looking pretty good. We're actually concerned in locations about if all this corn comes in, we're not going to have a whole lot of places to put it. We're going to have to be emptying some office buildings or something to get this corn stored. But when we get that 5 or 6 inches of rain like we've been getting, it does hold stuff up. And I was talking to a farmer Friday, and I was texting one this morning. They're hoping to get back into a field because it rained real heavy around here about a week ago, and they're waiting to get some of their bottom land planted, and that's still it's still taking time to get it dried out. And we've had 90-degree weather since then around in southwest Georgia. You get to that Delta region, that flooding we discussed too, and that Whitney and the Delta team has been covering so well. To look at what's going on there, about a third of some locations, the land is still not going to be planted possibly. You're talking about preventive planting measures. You start talking about not being able to plant at all. That's a concern. And we're coming up on some of these deadlines for insurance, stuff like that, at least in our area. That starts that first week of June when you talk about the cotton and the peanuts. And of course, we're past it for corn and soybeans, or getting close to it for corn and soybeans. And then, like you said, Shelly with the Southwest, and she's told you well, but she was on a trip last week and said how green things look for the first time around Texas. But Texas is like talking about a country. I mean, the northern part is more dry. That bottom part stays dry. And we can't talk water without policy. And, they're talking now that Secretary Rollins and Shelley was with her a couple of weeks back in Texas. She was talking about, negotiations or talks or carrots or sticks, or what do you want to say, with Mexico, trying to help them come around to help us with that water treaty they signed in 1944 to help bring us some water back into that lower Rio Grande area. And I think we're owed over a million acre feet of water from that thing. So hopefully that will come through, and those people down there in Texas can get some of that water they need. Again, they need that irrigation. Then the Ogallala aquifers getting shorter and smaller for them out there. But I get one of the points around here for us specifically, Sarah, in the Southeast, is we do have such a diversity of crops, and we plant for a long plant. We start planting row crops in February, and we may end up finishing up cotton in June. So that's a long growing season. And that's a lot of time for weather and water to do whatever it wants to do to us, and depending on the crop that comes through.
How about, you mentioned some of that dry land and irrigation crops, just kind of in your area, which would be like Southeast Farm Press. How much irrigation is there, and how do the aquifer levels affect that?
In the southeast part of the country, Sarah, the irrigation varies, but we'll talk about the upper southeast. We cover for Southeast Farm Press specifically from basically Virginia down to Florida and over to Alabama and parts of Tennessee. And that's a big area to cover, and it varies greatly. Now, up in the Carolinas, they do get good. There's more dry land, but there's a lot of irrigation depending on what parts of the state you're in. So it's hard to put a percentage on that. In Georgia, about half of our row crop acres are irrigated, and that's considered somewhat progressive. Half, and we have, when you're talking with our major row crops, you're talking peanuts, cotton, and corn and soybeans to a certain extent. So most farmers rotate, some of those farmers rotate that, but always there's about, the last extension people I talked to and saw the surveys, about half of that is irrigated. Now you get over in Alabama, it gets a little different, maybe 15. And they've been working on incentivizing irrigation in that state as well. The state legislative has been doing that for quite a decade. And there's things through grants and USDA grants as well to help incentivize the production cost sharing type thing for irrigation. It becomes access to water is a little bit, it's more like top water right there. You're talking ponds and lakes type thing, or rivers or creeks there, because of the way the topography is. It's hard to get real deep into the soil there. In our part of the world, you can dig, in some spots, maybe 50 or 60 feet and get good water. In some spots, you got to go about 100, 150, 200, depending on how deep it's called the Floridian aquifer for us. I got the Ogallala out there in Texas, but here it's the Floridian, which runs around here. And we, with the irrigation, like I said before, I'd say this, and it goes out with irrigation is that insurance policy that we've had to have again for that. There's no such thing as dryland corn, but about once every 5 years, maybe at best, if we get rains at the right time and the temperatures stay reasonable for us. But I'm reminded, just when we're talking about irrigation, I'm reminded of an old farmer and an extension guy. And this was 20 years ago, Curt. So it was back when we were 10 years old. But he was saying, drought will hurt you, but a flood will kill you. So we're more used to dealing with droughts with our irrigation, but the flooding, that's just something you can't deal with. It just comes and goes on its own around here, and we've dealt with enough flooding to hurt us on many occasions. But with irrigation, it's very much well used around here, and we're working on precision stuff. Low impact nozzles has been around here for quite some time, and for a long, 15, 20, 30 years ago, Florida and Alabama and Georgia were heavy in the water wars. And we were fighting over the water coming out of the Chattahoochee River, going down to the Gulf of Mexico. It was a challenge. And so there's a lot of attention went to that water. And in the last General Assembly, Georgia's General Assembly this year passed a law to allow, again, permitted well digging in Southwest Georgia, which has been stopped for about a decade or more because of that water war type thing.
Brad, talking about flooding, we don't experience that as not in the scope that you do, and not with the regularity. But the one that I did experience was in 2019. Here it was a March flood, so it was during the ice break, and we had even in our own area, we had pretty massive flooding and a lot of devastation to a lot of farms and livestock, obviously, and all that. And you are so right. I mean, we're used to dealing with drought in the upper plains. It's just pretty normal. But the flood thing is just a wipeout for so many farms and farmsteads, and the loss of livestock and all that. And the other one that hits us is wildfires, which we contend with, it seems, more and more, but those are just, horrible things. And drought is something that in our state we have a lot of irrigation, and Alabama does too, obviously. One of the things we wanted to talk a little bit about was, we get plenty of corn and soybean outlooks as far as, what the crop looks like. But how about peanuts and cotton? What is the crop outlook right now? How do things look? And how do things look for the spring and going on into the summer months for the crop that's now in the ground?
Yeah, I appreciate y'all letting cotton and peanuts be on the show today. So that's a great thing. I thought the world was planting in cotton and peanuts till I got to college, Curt. So I mean, I thought just was normal. But we're finishing up. In fact, a farmer I was just texting a while ago just texted me back, said he just finished up planting his peanuts right now. So we're usually mid-May is when we finish up our first peanuts, and it may run into June, depending on staggering off, and also the cotton planting. One interesting thing too is that we've covered, and I'm waiting to see what the result of this will be, and it's a little scary, and it's reflective in the markets that we're going through, Curt. Georgia typically has 1.2 to 1.3 million acres of cotton. We're the second largest producer of cotton behind Texas, but Texas makes about 11 million, 12 million. So it's a distant second. But this year, because of the market depression with cotton, and it stayed that way for quite some time, is that we may have a 700,000 acres, which you're talking, that's a third drop or more in our cotton acres compared to last year and previous years. And we're looking at possibly having 90,000 plus peanuts, which we've tried to look into. And I've asked my extension people, maybe the most peanuts we've ever grown in Georgia. You know, we can go back to pre-quota system and stuff like that to see, but that's in relation to just a response to the marketing. I mean, peanuts is not better. It's just the lesser of the evils right now. There's more corn going in the ground too around the area, Curt, as I mentioned before, and people are starting to experiment more with soybeans in some of their peanut rotations, which is a little sketchy because you can mess up, because peanuts and soybeans are both legumes, and they can trade diseases like white mold and Fusarium, all that kind of stuff very much easily. So that's a concern. And we're shortening up our rotations on our peanuts, which has been a concern too, across Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. And that increases the disease issues, as you know, Curt. For us, we like to have at least a 2 or 3 year rotation away from a field. And peanuts, if you go back to back and back to back, you may start a wildfire with diseases very, very quickly. But the outlook is, when the dirt starts turning and you start smelling that dirt, you start forgetting about how bad commodity prices are. I've noticed with farmers and us, we start thinking that we're just doing it. The dirt smells good, let's plant. And the mood gets better than it was earlier this year, Curt, when farmers are finally getting it planted and seeing what happens. The outlook on corn looks good right now. Waiting to see on the soybeans. The peanuts are coming up. I see some cotton is coming up. It looks good. Our issue too, you know, we talk about water, but that's natural. That's a natural thing. But one issue too is just almost as bad as water flooding, Curt, to say around here, is deer. We have major deer problems that eat up our cotton. There's a study that came out 2 years ago. I did it with a friend of mine, who's an extension specialist. It was as bad as almost anything else. It became the number one pest in the last 5 years is deer eating our cotton seedlings, and they're having to replant. Same thing for peanuts and hogs. So we talk about water and natural disasters and stuff like that. There's wildlife out there that causes this issue. So in fact, the farmer I was just texting with, he's replanting some cotton that got eat up by some deer. He's going out there today. It's a major issue as well. Not just the water he's waiting on to get away. And there's things we're trying to figure out how to keep that deer population from eating our crops down here. Florida is advanced a little bit more than we are because they start the season a little bit more. But the friends I've talked to down there, some are, getting ready to harvest wheat. Same thing in Georgia. Wheat harvest is going to be coming on pretty soon. We'll start with this corn, Curt. We'll be harvesting corn. Some will start in July, and then we'll hit in August. We'll start really corn harvesting around the southeast. Will come in heavy, and it'll gradually go north up into North Carolinas.
I never would have guessed that deer had that big of a role, because up here, we got a big hunting season. Everyone comes up here for a great hunting in the Dakotas and Minnesota. So maybe Georgia should have a little bit more of that. Depending, I didn't think deer were going to be the biggest pests for cotton.
It surprised a lot of people, sir, but the data's out there. And it was anecdotal data for years. People were saying, and they finally got on top of it. And Camp Hand, as extension specialist for the University of Georgia, did a really, really, really good survey with growers and land managers, and the data was there. But yeah, it's the deer population is extreme. There's any given night or morning I can go into my yard, which is not that far from an urban area, and there'd be 20 deer sitting in my yard trying to eat my garden.
God, I have the squirrels and the rabbits to try to eat my garden. That's a whole different kind of thing. But besides our water conversation, we first were talking about the water and availability and drought. You had another great topic you wanted to add a little bit about to this episode, which is talking a little bit about skin cancer and skin cancer prevention. Talking a little bit about stats from the American Academy of Dermatology. 1 in 5 people develop skin cancer in their lifetime, and about 9,500 people are diagnosed daily in the U.S. So what is it about skin cancer prevention that gets you so passionate and want to talk about it with our agriculture community?
Well, there's a personal part to it too, but I will go with this. Over the last maybe 19, almost 2 decades, I know personally or know of at least a dozen farmers who died directly related to melanoma. Now, a dozen may not seem like a lot in 20 years, but it is a lot, because those are the ones I just know about, I've heard about. I became passionate about it, 19 years ago. My wife was pregnant with our first, and I got diagnosed with melanoma, and it was just by chance. My wife looked at a mole on my stomach and said it looked like Italy. It was so shaped badly, and I never went to the dermatologist. I said, "All right, I'll just go for kicks and giggles." And sure enough, it was melanoma. Caught relatively early. Still had to go through some surgery to get some lymph nodes removed, but 20 years later, I'm in pretty good shape. But from that, as you know, May is Skin Cancer Awareness Month, and I appreciate y'all letting me talk about it because uh, I've had the same people too. Because I've written columns and kind of campaigned a little bit about my. I just want other people to go and go get checked out because farmers are more likely. People that work outside are obviously more likely to get damage to your skin and skin cancer, and it's so preventable if you get checked out. My passion is because I had it, and I know people that get skin cancer and don't think about it. People don't go to get themselves checked out. But I've had many people over the years since I've started writing those columns and doing videos or stuff like that, and they say, "Look at this mole." And I've had people at a county meeting, a farmer, lift up his shirt and say, "What do you think? Does this look like skin cancer?" And I always say, "Yes." I'm not a professional. I'd say yes. Go to a dermatologist. That's the first thing you should do if you have a questionable mole. Don't ask a reporter or journalist. Go to the dermatologist, and they can let you know for sure. And the experience, I've jokingly said I don't know how family oriented this, y'all want this to be, Sarah and Curt, but I saw I'll make it real nice. It's the second most important thing you could do naked is to stand in front of a dermatologist and get checked out for moles and for melanoma. I think it's very important for people to remember that it's not the most private thing. It's a weird thing, but go do it. It's well worth it. It's well worth it.
Well, your point, Brad, is so well made, and as a longtime farmer myself, you're like going to the doctor is like the last thing in the world you want to do, and you just don't want to take the time to do it for anything. And that's just one of those things. But the message is, most of this stuff, the really bad stuff, if you catch it early, it's treatable, and it makes I always tell people, you want to be around for your family for a long time, and so don't do it if you don't want to do it for yourself. Go do it for your family, right?
That's a good point, Curt, for sure. In fact, since we're doing this podcast and that came up with skin cancer, I know we talked about it, but I haven't been to my derm. At one time, I was going twice a year because I was on the post end of actually having melanoma. Now I'm back to once a year, and I have not been in about 2.5 years, Curt. So I am actually this week, cross my fingers, going to call my dermatologist and get that appointment so I can again, go be unashamed and get myself checked out again because I have two children. I got a family. I even got folks that like me and call me friends, Curt. So you kind of want to be around and stay around for them as long as you can.
Absolutely, Brad. It's always great to go to the dermatologist. And just even if you have a concern, that's their job. That's what they're there for. They want to help you. And one of the biggest things, and this is something I'm very passionate about, is putting on your dang sunscreen. I have sunscreen shoved just about everywhere because um, again, the American Academy of Dermatology Association says that excess exposure to UV radiation from sunlight or indoor tanning beds is the biggest increase of risk for skin cancer. We're all pretty white. I know up here in the north, we don't get the sun as often because it's dark. It seems like 6 months out of the year. So when we do, it really tends to burn. And even like 5 sunburns can increase your risk of developing skin cancer. So I've got sunscreen in my car, it's in my golf bag, it's in my rope bag, it's in my purse, it's in my desk. I have sunscreen literally everywhere, especially for those farmers that are out there all the time. And I think you made a good point. It doesn't even have to be the area of skin that's like exposed and getting sunburn for it to develop melanoma, it sounds like, right, Brad?
That's right. That's true. And over the years, over the almost 20 years, I've known the same dermatologist. Like I say, you get to know somebody in that intimate situation. You're either going to tell jokes and enjoy yourself, but uh, he's seen melanoma in places that God never intended for melanoma to be, Sarah. So it could show up anywhere. But to your point, since I've had melanoma, we've been certainly more sun oriented, but we're outside people. Do I wear sunscreen as much as I should? Still, no. I try to wear shirts like this. I'm wearing, with UV protection. I've always worn a cap anyway. Most people can't recognize me without a hat anyway. But broad brim hats, I realize are extremely cool 20 years ago. So I always have one of those around. But growing up, Curt, you may be the same way. I grew up in the summer here. The sunscreen around here here at the beach, and I grew up at the beach. Beach was where we went all the time during the summer, which is ground zero for any kind of melanoma you want to get. Probably nothing against the beach. I just love it to death. But our sunscreen was a thin white T-shirt. We thought that was my parents' idea of sunscreen, which we know has no protection whatsoever, especially when it's wet in the ocean. So we've definitely become more oriented with sun protection around here for my kids as well, because they are. I mean, if you want to turn on the camera for your podcast friends here, they'll look at me and say, "Yeah, he's blue eyed and pale. He probably shouldn't even be outside right now." So, but that's how it goes.
I mean, I'm old enough to have driven a lot of cabless tractors, and so you're out cultivating in the summer, and you have your shirt off, and I mean that was, my whole teenage life was that was kind of it, and you didn't think twice about a sunburn, but we didn't know, as much. I mean, science has come so far as understanding that, it's not just a single exposure, it's multiple exposures over a long period of time, and many of us have had probably way more than we should have, and we didn't know what sunscreen was. There was no such thing, and other than like a wide brimmed hat if you were out cultivating. If you were lucky, normally it was just a farmer's cap, and that didn't do much for your neck, obviously, and so and a really thin t-shirt, if not shirtless, probably. So yeah, I can totally relate to all of that, and I think your message, is really important for young people who are out in the sun all the time, but also for us older guys who can remember being more than tan, but burned an awful lot of times out in the field.
Yeah, for a long time, Curt, I mean, it still is the darkest part of my body is my neck, the back of my neck.
And two, I know a lot of people don't necessarily like sunscreen, but even if you're out there, like those sun hoodies, I wear those a lot because, again, we do a lot of outside stuff. We're golfing, we're team roping, we live outside in the summer. We got to get our outside time in. But even those clothing with an ultraviolet protection factor or UPF number on the label, if you don't want to slather up in sunscreen and get greasy or oily or anything like that, throw on one of those. And like you said, that wide brim hat. And I think anything people can do to just prevent it a little bit. And then, like you said, stay aware. If your spouse or significant other or whatever it is notices something, head on to the dermatologist.
Absolutely, and that's a great point, Sarah. And I think glad you made it. If you're listening to this, you know somebody that may need having their spouse, you check them out. And I jokingly, about 5 or 6 years ago, got my derm. He actually, I don't know if I'm getting him in trouble, but it's actually on a prescription pad. He made it and gave it. He read a prescription for my wife to at least check me for melanoma fully, top to bottom, twice a year. So every time I want to get that, I just kind of take out the prescription and say, "This is what the doctor ordered."
Well, Brad, is there anything that we haven't covered as far as the skin cancer thing? You've kind of given a lot of really good advice. I think Sarah's had some good statistics. And as we wrap up today, if you have one final message for our listeners.
Specific to skin cancer in May, I mean, if you have any questions about it, even if a year ago you thought of one that left your mind, just go get it checked, get that thing checked, get it checked. And even if you don't have any immediate concerns, think about getting on a steady rotation. And your internist, your regular doctor, they're skilled in doing these things as well. And they check you with your checkup. But it goes back to Curt, it's just an overall health approach to your life. It's melanoma, it's a lot of other things too. That's, we want to be around for our families, Curt, and we want our farmers to be around for their families as long as they can. So just be aware of your health in general and take care of yourself, because there's a lot of people depend on you, and they really want to keep you around.
Absolutely, Brad. And thank you for sharing so much about the water. And, like we kind of said a little bit on the Skin Cancer Prevention Month, it's a very important topic. And thank you so much for joining us today. And Curt, I think that about wraps it up for this Shop Talk episode of FP Next, powered by John Deere. Those links and topics we talked about in today's episode will be in the episode description, including the one from the American Association of Dermatology. Just so you can, if you want to find out more, you can just click on that link and see a little bit before you actually have to take the leap and call your dermatologist for that full checkout like you're talking about.
Yeah, Brad, we want to thank you for coming on today. We'll have links to some of the Farm Press articles as well that we talked about. To our listeners, we want to thank you for tuning into this episode of FP Next, allowing us into your tractor cab, your truck, on your farm, in your shop, and in your fields. A special thank you, as always, goes out to our digital production and marketing team members who put in a lot of work with us. And if you want to be sure not to miss any top stories, sign up for our Farm Progress Text Blasts. which bring the hot stories right to your inbox.
You can sign up for those text alerts by texting FARM, FARM, to 20505. Be sure to follow Farm Progress on social media to stay up to date with ag news and more, and check out the digital edition of your regional publications at farmprogress.com. Stay tuned for upcoming Farm Files episodes. We'll be sharing some great stories about all the things horses get us wrapped up in. And Curt, I think we're going to have to quiz each other too.
We can talk about horses all day long, every day, so this should be a lot of fun to have this episode.
Absolutely. You can follow along with FP Next by listening and subscribing on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube or Farm Progress Online. And Curt, I've had listeners call in and visit with me about the show who I don't think they left us a review or subscribed. So this is just another reminder. We don't want any of our listeners to miss the next great episode. So subscribe and, leave us a review while you're at it.
And Sarah always says 5 stars or nothing.
Remember, if it's agriculture, your friends at Farm Progress have you covered. Here's wishing you high yields and good weather. We'll see you next time.